full-time since the end of 2012, so I guess it's actually been 4 years at this point. I have sold on a lot of different venues. I started out on Etsy, so when my business started out, I was more or less making lamps and furniture, and then started moving away from that, largely because of the success of this clock, which is actually standing over there. So these Nixie Tube clocks have been probably 50% or more of my business for the last 2.5, 3 years. I started out selling them on Etsy. They started out not quite as refined a design. I ended up sort of, because I had already decided that I was going to do this as a full-time job, I had the luxury of a little bit of runway to start with a design, see how it sold, refine it a little bit, and kind of iterate until I finally got to this. And throughout that process, I learned a lot about making things in bulk, a lot about how to sell them, a lot about pricing, which is something that, unfortunately, if you're starting to sell, you need to think about pricing before you have any good idea of what your pricing should be. So it's a bit of a shot in the dark, and there's a lot of luck, and you sometimes have limited leeway to adjust your pricing later. This is more important on a high price item like this. So my clocks, when they're not on sale, the one in maple right there retails for $235. This one, which looks better not on this monitor, but it's made out of walnut. It's the exact same clock. It sells for $285. And one of the quirks of pricing, which I learned after setting up this as my premium model, which, by the way, cost me the exact same amount of money to manufacture. It is an identical product, just a different wood. Sells for $50 more, and it outsells the cheaper wood. Because, at least for high-end items, there is some premium, some literal premium paid for a premium item, even if there's no actual difference. So, you know, it's something to think about if you are in a higher price bracket of differentiating your products, having a base level, and then simply creating a more expensive version drives sales of both of them, because the cheaper one looks cheaper in comparison, and the more expensive one seems premium. Somebody once did a big study about how Williams-Sonoma did this, where they have a $285 waffle iron. Everybody walked into Williams-Sonoma and said, what the heck am I going to spend $285 on a waffle iron for? They then introduced a $410 waffle iron, and the $285 waffle iron started selling. So they've done studies about this sort of thing. And this was something that I literally stumbled into. I didn't do any of this research. I didn't do this intentionally, but I have since learned things like that. So in order to, I'll talk more about selling through my own website than Etsy, because I think Julie did a good job of covering Etsy.
The marketing term, if you want to research all that, is called perceived.
There we go, perceived value. So I set up my own website largely for branding and so that I had another venue to sell through, because Etsy, to start answering your question, Etsy is very good for lower priced items. One of the main problems with Etsy, as I see it, is you as a shopper have too many choices. So somebody will go on Etsy and here, watch. I'll go on Etsy right now and search for Nixie clock, and you'll see hundreds of listings.
And so the richer you are, the more of a chance you have of your image appearing in the...
There's a lot to it. So, you know, just there's an entire page of Nixie clocks, and we'll probably have to scroll for quite a while to find. There's mine. And you'll notice that it says ad in the upper left-hand corner, and that's because I pay for promoted listings, because otherwise it's very difficult to stand out in the field. And this, for lower-priced items, which people do as an impulse buy, or for very unique items like Julia's items, it's less of a problem. But for more commodity items, which Nixie Tube clocks have become, unfortunately, this is more of an issue with Etsy. So I've moved away from this. This is actually another selling venue, but I don't need to get into that. It's complicated. So, you know, for larger priced items, for things where you're only going to sell in a good year a few hundred, as opposed to 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 if you're selling very cheap items, you need to be able to drive people to look at just your products. So a website's good. I pay for Facebook ads to get people to my website. My website specifically is through Squarespace. I don't have any particularly just to Squarespace. I've been using them. I happen to like them. It's very easy to make a nice looking website. They have built-in commerce, so you can actually click through and, you know, you can press the purchase button. You can, I have a how did you hear about us? You can click through, put in all your credit card information stuff, and then I get an email about the order. It's all linked to a payment processor, Stripe in this case. So when people place credit card orders, I get an order email, and then a couple of days later, it just shows up in my bank account. Obviously, there are processing fees for all of these things, but basically all of the online selling platforms at this point have integrated commerce that works pretty smoothly. So I'll just get an email saying ship to them, I mark it as shipped, that's it. So it's all relatively easy to do from that standpoint once you get it set up. Branding, as Julia said, very important. Good photographs are probably the number one thing you need if you're going to be selling online. Because when you're in person, somebody just picks up your item and they look at it and they decide whether or not they like it. But if you're selling online, all they have to go on is photographs. So I've spent, for every one of these listings, I've spent literal hours taking the same photograph over and over from slightly different angles with slightly different lighting. I built sort of a DIY light box, which is how, these sort of look like they're just floating there. It's because I did that thing where you get a curved piece of white cardboard behind it. There are lots of tutorials online about how to take good photos for Etsy, for that sort of thing. But without good photos, you will sell nothing online. So I have my website. I've also done a bunch of wholesale orders, which happen largely with somebody in a business like mine. They happen when somebody from a company reaches out and say, hey, I saw you on Etsy, I saw you on, one of the first ones I did was Touch of Modern, which is a big flash sale website. Once you get onto one of those websites, a lot of other people see you and will email if they like your product and say, can I place an order for 50 of these? Can I place an order for 100 of these? And then you have to negotiate the terms, you have to figure that all out. You obviously get paid a lot less for wholesale orders, but the benefit is you know that you can sell a lot at once, which for anything that you're mass producing, like laser cuttings or like these clocks, which I have templates and I just stand over a router and make them over and over, it's a huge benefit in terms of time and cost per unit you make. Just to get back to the pricing thing a little bit. So the general rule for wholesale retail pricing, and this is sort of a holdover from brick and mortar stores, so it's not necessarily true anymore, but it has always been that retail is twice wholesale cost. So my clock retails for $235, that means my wholesale cost is expected to be $117.5, meaning I only get 50% of my retail price if I wholesale order it. So when I sell 100 of these clocks, I only make $117.50 each. So what that means is I need to basically set my production cost to make sure that I make enough money on the wholesale cost that I could wholesale all day. And so that if I end up selling something retail or at a wholesaler who happens to pay a little bit better, then the rest of that is just gravy. So when I sell things on my website, it's fantastic for me because I make an extra, basically 100%. On Etsy, their fees are a lot lower, so it's a very good starting point for somebody who does custom things, somebody who does craft, or who isn't going to wholesale. But so if I'm going to sell a clock for $235, it really ideally shouldn't cost me more than $55 to make, which doesn't.
Can I have an idea of the quantities you're talking about in terms of a wholesale
Yeah.
sold?
So the quantities that I have sold.
Yeah.
So the largest wholesale order I fulfilled was in the middle of this year. I sold 250 clocks to ThinkGeek, which was the largest wholesale order I've ever done. Before that, the largest wholesale order I had ever fulfilled was 20. But that's just strict wholesale. I've also done flash sales like Touch of Modern, where I've sold 60 to 100 clocks. But it's not technically a wholesale order, though they still do wholesale pricing. There are other retailers who, and this is something to watch out for when you start, there are online retailers who will try to take 55 or even 60%, and they say that they have added value in terms of marketing. Some of them, like thegrommet.com for instance, they approach people and say, we'll pay you 40, we take 60, but we're going to build a whole brand, we're going to get you exposure. Not saying it doesn't work, but be really careful about that because you don't want to start out underselling yourself. And it is definitely possible if you have a product that is going to sell anyway, it's possible to do it yourself, but it is, as Julia said, a tremendous amount of work. You have to make the products, and then on top of that, you're probably going to spend that same amount of time again until your business is really up and running. At least that same amount of time again, getting your photos right, writing your ad copy, setting up all your business accounts, emailing people, dealing with orders, shipping orders, filing your taxes, setting up an LLC if you want to. There's a lot of effort put into maintaining a business. And the other tip that I will give just to absolutely everybody, if you are planning on starting to sell online, get yourself some sort of accounting software. It can be free. Personally, I use Wave, which is 100% free. And start keeping track of your expenses and your income immediately. Because the first year I had to file taxes, they said, what was your income for business? What were your costs? And I went, oh crap, I have no idea. And I needed to spend a week filing through paper receipts and figuring it all out. So for an hour a week now, I keep everything done so that when taxes roll around, I pull up a single report and it says you spent this much on advertising, you spent this much on shipping, your income was this much, you paid this much in Connecticut sales tax. So ounce of prevention, pound of cure, start accounting early.
Good advice.
Questions? Because I just rambled for quite a bit.
No, it's great.
My question is, how did you decide to sell the walnut one as a premium one as opposed to the maple one?
I decided that I wanted to differentiate it. I kind of took a flyer on it, if I'm being honest.
You just like,
Yeah, my logic was basically the maple one was selling well enough that I figured it made sense to try to push the price point up a little bit. So it was honestly just trying to play around with it a little bit. It was a bit of a guess.
Do you think it looks better than the maple one?
Personally, no. I actually like the maple one more, which is why I made the maple one initially, because I go for a kind of mid-century feel. Not that walnut isn't mid-century, but I think that the maple has kind of a cleaner look to it. But basically, everybody seems to disagree with me. I would say that the walnut ones and the Babinga one, which is this red one here, which is the same price as the walnut, they sell probably 50% more units than the maple.
You say the contrast is higher between
The contrast, and
wood.
yeah, and I get it. And I think Nixie tubes tend to sort of sell to the geek market a little bit, and I think the geek market tends to like glowy things and dark colors. I don't know. That's the logic that I tell myself. But yeah, it was basically just a guess.
Yeah, no.
Can you talk about website promotion a little bit? And have you seen results based on the work that you've put
Yeah.
in?
So.
What's most valuable, I guess?
Yep. The only explicit advertising that I've done, I did Google Adwords for a while. I found that Google Adwords was not particularly useful for my business. That's not to say Google Adwords aren't useful. It's a very powerful platform. You have a lot of tools. The reporting is fantastic. A lot of flexibility. The reason why it doesn't work well for me is because I sell high-priced items which you need to look at a photograph of. And Google Adwords is, you can pay for photo ads, but it's much more difficult. Google AdWords is more or less text ads, and text ads don't sell expensive visual products. So, if you're selling something that can be very well explained with one sentence of text, Google AdWords are probably fantastic. But for my particular business, I found they just weren't useful. What I do find works is Facebook ads. Because Facebook ads, incredibly specific targeting, and not that expensive, and photographs. Plus, everybody has Facebook, and not everybody uses Google. So what I can do is I'll create Facebook ads where I will give them 3 photographs. It will optimize whichever photograph seems to get the most clicks, it'll put that in the ad. And I can optimize it, and I can specifically say, I want this ad to be shown to people between the ages of 18 and 40 who live in the United States, who have expressed interest in high-end home decor, who spend a lot of money shopping online. And you can serve your ads just to that population, which means that your click-through rate and your engagement rate end up very good. So, online advertising, you're spending a lot of money and not necessarily going to get a lot of clicks. I've seen it a couple places. If your click-through rate on ads is better than 1%, you're doing pretty well. So when I do a good ad, I get a click-through rate of 2.5%, and maybe 1% of those turn into sales. But if you have a high-priced product, if I spend $70 per acquisition and sell it through my website, I still sold the clock more expensive than I would have wholesaled it. So when you wholesale, you can basically think of it as you're just paying somebody else to advertise for you. So if you can advertise yourself cheaper, it's good. I personally like to diversify between wholesaling and retailing because I'd rather have the stable income of knowing I just sold 250 clocks. Money's in the bank, clocks are out the door, done.
So last question, and then we can revisit questions. I just want to get through our people.
Do you keep in touch with your customers? Is there a culture aspect?
Good question. I keep in touch with the customers who actively keep in touch with me. There is a bit of a culture aspect of it. The largest way that manifests itself is I do a reasonable amount of commission work as well, and most of my commissions have come from people who bought clocks. One of my single largest commission, in fact, came from somebody who bought a clock, it broke or like didn't work properly out of the box. He sent it back, I fixed it, and a week later he sent me an email saying, hey, I have this idea for a project, can we work on this? So there are definitely people who keep in touch, and I try to be, and this is another thing I recommend, be really responsive. Even if your email response is just to say, thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Always respond within 24 hours, try to respond within an hour. If people have questions about shipping or the product, the quicker you respond, the better it is. The quicker you say you can ship, the better it is. People are used to Amazon Prime at this point. If you have a product that says you'll ship in 5 to 7 days, they're less likely to buy it. 5 to 7 days is not that much, especially for a custom thing, but if you can say I will ship it in 1 business day, they're far more likely to buy it. So be responsive, ship quickly. That makes a much bigger difference than you might
feel
imagine.
special.
Putting up the shipping costs, 'cause I know this program at one point.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of program or fix the rates if you're shipping across the country and it changes.
Squarespace specifically has an option where you can have it calculate the cost, same as Etsy. So, yeah. So I actually have them. Squarespace in each of my listings, it knows the clock weighs this much. It's in a box this big, priority mail, and so I literally just say use the priority mail rates plus 25%, and that plus 25% is because I insure all of my packages. But Squarespace does have it's under the settings commerce tab. Yeah. One of the good things about Squarespace is there's a great help site. You can just go on there and search for it.
Also, is this a fancy camera size or just a
It's not a particularly fancy camera. It's a Canon from 10 years ago. It's like a DSLR. It's not a high-end camera. If you bought it today used, it would probably be $300.
But it's actually an actual camera.
It's an actual
not a
camera.
phone.
It's an actual camera. It's not a phone. I didn't buy this. My wife had this camera and wasn't using it, so I took it over for my business. You don't necessarily need a fancy camera. There's a lot you can do with, especially the later model iPhones. But if you are trying to sell higher end products where looks matter, it's probably worth spending at least a couple $100 on a camera. It will return.
Let's return to any other questions for you so we get Salman.